Story 1. A woman in charge of bookkeeping gave herself 20 extra days of leave she was not entitled to because she said she deserved them. Story 2. Many years ago, there was an international organization for standardization audit of a manufacturing company's processes. A major part of the company's marketing was that it was certified by the International Organization for Standardization and compliant with its standards. The warehouse manager believed the processes only needed to be documented. He thought compliance was otherwise meaningless, and staff followed only the procedures that were convenient. He yelled at me and stormed out when I asked for documentation. I suggested that the company reconcile its actual inventory with its reported inventory. There were significant discrepancies. I never saw him again. Story 3. I am not an auditor, but a friend who used to do internal reviews told me the funniest thing he ever found. A whole department sharing one person's login because he was the only one who remembered the password. They had it written on a sticky note taped under a keyboard. Fixing the culture took much longer than fixing the breach. Story 4. I was called in after an acquisition that had been completed without due diligence because the new owners had found suspicious issues. One manager had been writing checks, having treasury staff cash them, and then taking the cash for himself, totaling tens of thousands of dollars. There was no attempt to hide it. The manager treated it as a business expense without receipts. No one found this odd because he had worked there for decades and was well liked. The mind-blowing cherry on top was that months before the acquisition, the previous owners rewarded him for his years of service by doubling his pension. In the agreement, he specifically requested and obtained a clause stating that this benefit remains in place even if it is later found that fraud has been committed. Because he was so trusted, no one on the board considered this a red flag. In another incident, while in my new boss's office, I noticed a list of names on her desk and asked what it was for. She said it was the monthly list of prepaid mobile credit we bought for employees, and it looked expensive. I asked for a pen and started adding notes. On the first page, I marked people who had retired 2 years earlier, moved to headquarters 4 years earlier, left the company, or died 1 year earlier. I cut the list by 20% in 5 minutes. I still don't understand why the person handling this wasn't fired. Story 5. Oh boy. I frequently serve as a subject matter expert for supplier audits. We were evaluating a company that offered a version of a critical material for our manufacturing process. We had never purchased from this company before, but our original supplier was discontinuing the version of the material we used, so we had to investigate all options. The material looked perfect. Specifications matched those we had previously used, and the company claimed to follow good manufacturing practice with appropriate controls. So the audit should have been straightforward. Not so fast. The company was a subsidiary of a larger Chinese firm, but had a facility in New York City. They claimed to ship raw materials from China to that facility, where they performed sterile formulation and fill operations in an ISO 14644-1 Class 5 cleanroom. That was my first concern. Why would anyone pay the outrageous New York City rent for a sterile manufacturing facility when they could have one outside Manhattan? I requested their cleanroom design, analytical testing laboratory design, and an example certificate of analysis for the material to start, but nothing added up. The floor plan required more space than their advertised office could have. Then I examined the certificate of analysis and compared it to the last few certificates of analysis for the material we currently used. That was when I realized this was a forgery. Not only were the results identical to the third decimal place, which is technically impossible even with repeated measurements on the same instrument, but the font was the same. They had taken the portable document format file from the original manufacturer and applied their logo. Needless to say, we did not do business with that company. Story 6. I was auditing a bank once in my capacity as a Department of Labor investigator. I discovered an audit report from another agency that indicated their entire internal computer network had been compromised when hackers posing as computer repair technicians were given full, unsupervised access to the system. Story 7. Entire departments' worth of shared folders had permissions that were never cleaned up. Employees transferred to other departments, sometimes to different parts of the company. Because they had been given direct access to a network drive instead of through an access control group, hundreds of people were able to access data they were not authorized to view. Story 8. One day I randomly pulled a file to audit. I probably did not need to since I already had a sufficient sample size. It was an expense report full of questionable items. I reported it to a superior and was removed from the assignment and told not to address it further. They said I was showing early signs of trolling and they did not want me going full-bore Columbo. A year later, the person who prepared that expense report died by suicide rather than face the fraud. I was just standing there and happened to grab one more file. It was not trivial. It is the most memorable fraud case I will ever recall. Story 9. Just really obvious mistakes like, what are these blister strips of tablets doing on top of this equipment? They are rejects. Are they? How do you know? I will put them in the bin. No, what are they? Are they from this batch? I do not know. Or, where did you record this information? On this sticky note. Or, is this vacuum flask a laboratory reagent? It is just a drink, is it not? Yes, it is just a drink. On day 2 of an audit. Let me look something up for a second. What is that? What is what? That folder. It is the Udrelex, the guidance that I am auditing you against. Oh, I have never seen that. Can I have a copy? Sometimes you get deep into whether there is adequate documented and scientific justification for doing or not doing something according to quality risk management principles. And sometimes it is just people doing dumb stuff. I remembered another one. What does the camouflage pattern tape on this hose mean? Oh, we did not have any brown tape left, so we temporarily substituted camouflage tape. The separate colors on the key are brown, tan, and green. Yes, we are using camouflage for brown. It has all 3 of those colors in it. Do you see how that could not be more ambiguous? Story 10. We were auditing a private equity real estate development company. Pretty routine, their annual financial statements. This was about 20 years ago. One of their keystone investment projects was development of land that had previously been a landfill and was filled to make way for a luxury golf resort, hotel, and housing spanning a few hundred acres. I randomly decided to search online for the project. It had drawn lots of praise and political approvals when it was greenlit. This was a departure from just looking at the numbers, footing, and tracing balances. On paper, everything looked fine. What the numbers did not show was that one of the principal leaders of the project and the major contractor had just been indicted on several $100 million in federal racketeering charges alleging drug and human trafficking, political bribery, large-scale environmental violations, and subcontracting with illegal waste management companies run by organized crime. He was a fugitive. There was a nationwide search. We auditors called that a material impairment. We were about to issue financial statements valuing a development project at the center of an organized crime prosecution at fair value, despite the fact that the leaders of the operation were likely going to prison for fraud. Story 11. I was not an auditor, just a random information technology technician. The security department messaged our team. We have just disabled the senior executive's entire account. He followed a suspicious phishing link. The account is compromised, and we cannot contact him. Perform a password reset and a full virus scan when you find him. A few minutes later, he showed up at the information technology help desk and said, Microsoft Teams is not working. Fix it. I told him his account had been disabled by security. He laughed and said, I guess I did something I should not have done. Tell me when it is fixed. Then he walked off. I called his executive assistant to tell her she would not be able to access his email for a while. I started, Hey, I just wanted to let you know we had to disable his account due to a security incident. She interrupted, Oh my God. Again, which Nigerian scammer did he give his password to this time? Yes, senior executives are fun. Story 12. I did one in college as part of a class for a friend's small business that he could not make profitable. After paying bills, he was earning less than minimum wage. My professor assigned 3 of us to audit the business. We pulled documents and tracked inventory, income, and expenses. The 60% partner and co-owner was taking the business's money and paying bills from a personal checking account, and used inventory to replace personal items without accounting for it. Our team received an A. My friend dissolved the business, and he and the other owner no longer speak. Story 13. A lumber yard manager recorded the receipt of an entire shipload of lumber on the last day of the year, because he knew the ship would be coming in any day. Story 14. I was not an auditor, but had to call one in. A lazy vice president had the secretary sign expense reports for underlings when expense reports required physical signatures. The secretary began filing false expense reports, starting very small and eventually getting bolder. The situation worsened when the accounting system was moved to a new platform, creating a couple of months without reports during which the employee became bolder. The audit found about $20,000 in embezzled funds. The employee likely could have continued longer if they had not gotten greedy and submitted nearly $5,000 in the last month. The employee was fired but faced no legal consequences. Story 15. I was conducting a compliance inspection for an aviation maintenance outfit. It was the third in a run of 4 site inspections that we perform every other year. The previous 2 had gone so poorly that the maintenance lead for the entire company had shown up 2 weeks beforehand to shore everything up before our inspection. Over the course of 2 days, we found such a systemic and intense lack of concern that I would have grounded their entire fleet if my boss had not persuaded me otherwise. The individual mechanics were all in good condition, but the company culture was abysmal. Everything came to a head when I went looking for someone to lead me through the hazardous materials lockers, and there was no point of contact posted anywhere. Hazardous materials had been a recurring issue in this series of inspections, so I expected them to have squared it away after being cited twice already, especially since I knew the company representative had been on site for 2 weeks. I asked around and was repeatedly told that hazardous materials was Jose's job. This was in South Florida. There were dozens of people in the building named Jose. I couldn't find the company lead, so I asked the site manager who I needed to talk to. He walked out into the hangar, looked around for about 10 seconds, looked back at me and said, "You know what? I really don't care." I lost my temper. I gathered my team and we walked out. My report was so scathing that I received a call from the company's government customer the same day I filed it. The site manager was fired, the company lead had a heart attack the next week, and the government customer barred the company from doing business with the government again. The company won the contract rebid and, as far as I know, is still doing maintenance in that facility. Story 16. A transportation company had an expensive lawnmower on its books, although there was no grass anywhere on the premises. The owner had just bought a lawnmower costing $15,000 for his private residence and decided to register it with the company as a business expense. Story 17. I don't know if it counts, but the company's owners flat out told us that they put the kickbacks in that account when we asked what the consulting expense was. Story 18. A site had valuable customer records, including personally identifiable information and bank data, in hard copy in a large unlocked filing cabinet next to a fire exit that led to the stairs down to the street. Why do you have hard copies of this data? Well, some people do not trust computers. Okay. Who has the key to this filing cabinet? We do not lock it. We lost the keys ages ago. So you have unsecured customer and vendor records in plain text with financial and bank data in an unlocked filing cabinet? Yes, but it is in the way back. If anyone tried to steal from it, they would have to pass by several people and they would get noticed. It is right next to the fire exit. Someone could open that door and you would never see them. That door is locked. It says not to lock it by order of the fire marshal. That makes sense since it is a fire exit. But we only keep it unlocked during business hours. It has an alarm. I just came in that way. I did not hear any alarm. Yes, it is a shortcut to the parking garage, so we turn the alarm off so employees who smoke can take their break back there. Okay. So someone could come from the parking garage with direct access to their vehicle, come in through the back, steal records, no one would see them, and they could leave with them and drive to the main street. You make that sound bad. Listen, Nancy Drew. The chance of that chain of events happening is really unlikely and remote. But it would only have to happen once. Story 19. I just started working in a factory that manufactures medical devices. There is a regular audit coming up. In my industry, patient safety requires extreme attention to detail. I had to unlearn several informal practices I picked up during the past few months because they are not part of the official manufacturing process. Using blue tack to hold the soldering jig in place is a breach. I must hold the part with my pinky while holding the tweezers with my thumb and index finger. Preparing multiple batches in advance and storing them on the shelf is a breach. Only one batch may be prepared at a time. Using moisturizing cream to help tiny components stick to my fingers is a breach. This practice apparently slipped through 2 previous audits, but if discovered, it could require returning, scrapping, and replacing every device made in the last decade, costing several $100 million. Story 20. I worked for a call center that was not payment card industry compliant, which meant we were not allowed to handle payments or card transactions. If a call required a payment, agents were instructed to transfer it to another call center that was certified. Every week, 2 or 3 agents would take customers' card details into our system before transferring the call, thereby storing full details on a non-compliant system. Those details might not even have been encrypted. We wrote a program to find and scrub them, but when the time came for a full audit, we inevitably missed a few. Story 21. I used to audit policing systems in the United Kingdom. I would select a number of transactions to audit and send an audit form to the relevant user if I could not trace the transaction myself. For example, if they had not included a crime number or other reference. The user had to justify the transaction, provide evidence where available, and have the form countersigned by their supervisor. The supervisor also had to verify the check if there was no evidence to send. Misuse of this particular system could result in disciplinary proceedings, dismissal, or even prison time. One transaction was a vehicle insurance check against a vehicle registration number with no reference included. I tried tracing the registration on our other systems with no results, so I sent a form. I was astonished when it came back with the explanation that it was the user's personal vehicle, which he had sold, and he wanted to check that the insurance had been changed. The user was casually admitting blatant misuse. The form had been countersigned by the supervisor with no comments. I did not know whether the supervisor had spoken to the user about the misuse or had not read or did not care about the form. I forwarded it to professional standards as per protocol, but I have no idea what, if anything, came of it. Story 22. This was not an audit, but it revealed some sneakiness. At the start of the day, users of a production system would record the use of 1 kilogram each of 10 different bulk products. At the end of the day, they would reverse those entries so nothing had actually been used. The system printed country of origin labels, and to ensure the correct information appeared on the labels, you could select only from the countries of the products actually used that day. Sure enough, the 10 products they recorded were each from different countries, allowing them to print whatever country they wanted on the labels. They were not trying to mislead. They did this to print labels in advance, but in doing so they circumvented all system controls. Story 23. I used to work in the risk department for one of the large accounting firms. We would audit the financial relationships held by senior members of the firm to make sure they complied with all the rules on what they could or could not hold. We would get on calls with these people and walk through anything that might raise a flag and give them a chance to explain, since there were permissible reasons for them to hold some of these things, such as blind trusts, advisor-directed accounts, and other similar arrangements before closing the file or escalating for compliance sanctions. One man was under heightened monitoring because his wife was a partner at the firm. He and his wife had to be on a joint call with us because some of their holdings were questionable under the restrictions, and because they were married, they were responsible for each other's holdings. He had labeled a bank account in the internal reporting system as someone else's account. The account was at a bank that was restricted for them. They were not supposed to have accounts there. My manager and I pulled up the list of items to discuss, and the wife had no idea the account existed. She saw the label and that it was under his reporting file, and she immediately turned her camera off. They were on the call from separate rooms in their house, and from the husband's side we could hear a few moments of screaming before his camera cut out and they both dropped off the call. I spoke to my manager later. Apparently this had been an issue in their relationship before, and the man had set up the account to hide money for an affair. Story 24. I audit freight invoices, and I love when a carrier adds a miscellaneous charge, sometimes for thousands of dollars. I always question it, and you would be surprised how many carriers do not know what it is for. One example was a $10 miscellaneous charge. When I questioned it, I was told the driver had stopped and bought a 12-pack of root beer for the road. Story 25. A man took a selfie while accepting a bribe. Story 26. I was auditing a Lloyd's of London insurance company valued in the billions a few years ago. I noted some reinsurance contracts in a listing that did not seem to be in the summary sheet they used. I was told that this was impossible, because in all the years they had used it, the sheet's checks had always reconciled to zero. Gentlemen, the sheet was being reconciled to itself. Not the worst thing by far, but I often wonder how much of the global financial world potentially rests on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that reconciles to itself somewhere. Story 27. A company once paid $100 million in dividends despite not having a profit, which resulted in negative retained earnings. I had to convince them to record it as a director loan shown as a director's receivable. Story 28. Historical researcher. A bank failed in the early 1900s. The receiver tried to collect on a 90-day note that was 5 years old for $2,000. Interest had been paid until the bank failed. The man alleged to have taken out the loan was dead, and his wife had been the executrix. No copy of the note was in the borrower's possession. The court determined that the note was forged and that interest had been paid to prevent discovery. Story 29. This is kind of the inverse of another post. The department I run, special education at a Title I public school, was audited by the state this week. The auditors were some of the most incompetent people I have ever met. To be clear, I have nothing against auditors generally. Many are brilliant, just not these auditors. They asked us for thousands of pages of printed documents that they already had and kept contradicting themselves. They asked for the behavior tracker for a specific student. I handed it to them. They asked why I would give them that tracker, saying it was just the generic one from the state. I explained that state guidance requires us to use the tracker they provide. They then said the tracker was useless and asked why I gave it to them, even though they had asked for it minutes earlier. The interview the next day was almost unbelievable. They repeatedly asked essentially the same question in many forms. How are teachers informed about their responsibilities regarding special education? How is that documented? When are teachers informed? How do teachers get answers, and how do they ask questions? My first answer covered all of those points, so I just repeated it until they stopped asking the same question in different ways. Their final question was, "What documentation occurs at your school?" I asked, "Regarding what?" They repeated the question without clarifying. Documentation is most of the job in schools, and for several people it is their full-time work, so I started listing everything I could think of. They yelled that I was telling them too many things but would not define the scope. So I kept listing documentation until they told me to stop. We passed the audit with flying colors. But seriously, what was that? Story 30. Car insurance. More than a dozen cars had the same address. An embassy in London representing a foreign country. The matter was referred to underwriters and the policy validation team. It may all have been above board, but it was certainly worth checking. Story 31. I perform international automotive task force audits for automotive suppliers. The silliest case involved a management review document submitted during the planning phase that proved to be falsified. When I was on site, a man in his 60s was bawling after I issued a major nonconformity. I have had other wild incidents. One person threatened to physically assault me over a finding, which led to termination of their audit and loss of certification for their company. Another time, the plant caught on fire during the audit. The vast majority of audits are uneventful. Most people are trying to do a good job. Story 32. I am the quality manager who is audited, but once I received a nonconformity because someone printed a standard operating procedure and the footer was partially cut off. I reprinted the document without an unnecessary border to show it was a user error, but the auditor did not accept it. Story 33. I worked for a company that was using a machine learning model to diagnose patients with neurological disease. Their lead data scientist quit, so they hired me. The first thing I did was audit their model. The model did nothing except predict whether a patient was old or young. I told the chief executive officer what I found, and instead of allowing me 6 weeks to fix it, he eliminated my position. They wanted me to lie so they could push the model through the Food and Drug Administration. If this had happened, it would have indirectly diverted millions from legitimate research initiatives. Story 34. I have the opposite experience. We have quality auditors who believe that if they find something that should be part of the specification, they can write it up and charge it against a department metric. Now, you are not the ones determining the specifications. You are auditing to ensure those specifications are met. You do not get to write up a display because the view is not level. Meanwhile, these same auditors check and purchase components while ignoring the clearly defined metrics required to assemble those parts into our products. Story 35. I am not an auditor, but I work in information technology. I received a request to export an employee's entire email history. It turned out he was double-dipping, sending reimbursement requests to both the county and the state. He was caught and fired, and the case became a lawsuit, which is why they needed his email records. I never heard the outcome. It was too small a fraud case to make the news, but it was enough for a state or county auditor to detect and report it. Story 36. Someone thought hiding files in a folder named "Do Not Open" would secure them. Story 37. Someone stored confidential files in a folder labeled "Not Porn," which in fact contained porn. Story 38. An employee emailed all client information to a personal email account and did not delete it. Story 39. Our company policy allows birthday celebrations in the office if employees pay for cakes with personal credit cards, not company cards. We found a loophole. Employees are allowed to buy individual snacks on company cards when they are out of the office. For each birthday, employees leave during lunch to buy individual slices of cake on company cards, then reassemble the cake for the party. This has continued for almost 2 years. Story 40. 2 incidents come to mind. 1. On a final video call with a client, I realized that the login information on their screen looked wrong. It turned out their chief financial officer had given everyone the administrator password and username to their accounting software because performing his administrative tasks was too inconvenient. I was junior enough to escalate the issue. 2. This one was not deliberate, but it still stumps me how a finance person could do this. The company had completed its first bond issuance about 3 years earlier. I was a junior auditor and was assigned the bonds because they are relatively straightforward. I found a discrepancy I could not track down. Although we allow a threshold for discrepancies, we usually want to know the cause. Whenever they paid interest, they increased their liability instead of recording an interest expense. We caught it before it became a major issue. I still cannot understand how an entire finance department could not interpret an amortization schedule. Story 41. Someone emailed all passwords to themselves and left them in the inbox. Story 42. I discovered a 75-cent error in a computer accounting log. Story 43. Most auditors will tell you that nonprofits run by volunteers are a horror show. Everything runs on the honor system, which means that even if nobody is trying to cheat, a lot will still fall through the cracks because nobody cares enough to run a tight ship. I joined the board of my homeowners association for a high-rise condominium several years ago and uncovered all kinds of mismanagement due to a lack of financial controls. For example, we had a unit owner who had the handyman do about $5,000 of work on his unit. The owner was invoiced, but it was never recorded as a receivable. When that owner sold his unit a couple of months later, it was too late to enforce collection. I asked our treasurer what had happened and was told, "Oh, he has lived here 20 years. I'm sure he'll pay it back." Predictably, he never did, which meant that the 200 owners in the homeowners association each paid about $25 in extra assessments to cover that one owner's unit preparation for sale. They did not know this, of course, but that is the kind of problem good financial controls will prevent. Story 44. I interviewed an internal auditor who had just completed an information technology security audit of an entity the group had acquired. He said the control culture at that entity was non-existent. He said information technology had every staff member's password recorded in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet stored in a shared folder that was not password protected. I was astonished, and the group's risk management and compliance functions prioritized providing proper training to everyone. At the start of a walkthrough of a system, I noticed the number of unread notifications in the inbox. I asked what the number represented. The quality assurance person sitting beside the presenter removed her glasses and sighed. It turned out to be the number of unregistered cases, and it was more than 2,000. There were strict requirements that all cases be registered within a certain number of working days, so the maximum number of unregistered cases should have been a few hundred at most. This was a major breach of process, and the quality assurance person who was supposed to resolve the issue resigned shortly after my manager brought it to management's attention. Story 45. Once I found someone who was not logging on or off times, but increased the same number by one each day. Took months for anyone to notice, which was amusing. Story 46. Someone left a sticky note with their password on the monitor. Story 47. Was it a materials wholesaler? I cannot imagine a construction company not tracking per job costs. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.